we're going to get to the next workshop, actually. So, Ashley, if you have a few minutes, we're just going to put you on mic, or is that something that you wanted to...
Yeah.
Because I think we have an extra mic already.
Cool. So what we wanted to do was make sure that today was not just a bunch of talking, and we wanted it to be some doing as well. You demonstrated what you've done already. We've been doing a lot of talking. So we wanted to have a policy jam, and there was also a comment earlier in this room about not including or thinking about open source as just technicians. And so we've actually been doing open policy development, and we've been doing that in the open. So everything from the open first white paper to now the creation of an open source policy. And so that is available on GitHub. You guys can see not only the link up there, but it is available. Guillaume, what's the easiest way to navigate to it? Through the Open Source Advisory Board?
Yeah, email. I'll send everybody that's registered today.
Okay.
On Canada.ca, there's the
Okay. So in the Canada.ca, in the Canada.ca repo, we have a link to the open source policy. So what we want to do today is have people have their hands on keyboards and actually start to put in pull requests to make changes to the open source policy itself. So some of the themes that have come up, or areas where people have commented on wanting to make changes, exist within the license. So for example, Calvin was speaking earlier in this room. He talked about some of the challenges that he went through not having direction from Treasury Board on licensing. And so those are one of the things that we want to address in here. Even doing procurement. So if you guys, we've put a shell of a policy up there to this point. As I said, via pull request, you are able to actually comment on any sort of changes, and we will moderate all of those. That said, I know that not everybody has their computers here, so you can do it when you guys have time. So for those of you that would like to keep working, you can right now. And for those of you that want to just ask questions about the policy and our approaches on it, we can do that as well. I'm just going to give my computer.
Yep. So,
no, go for it.
Okay, so for anybody that wants to start putting pull requests, I've put the link up there so you get access to the Git repo. Otherwise, I'd encourage discussions, thoughts, comments here with the people and with us, so that we can take notes and put it back online so that people can interact as well. So I think we have a first person. Will?
Yeah, and maybe after this question, we can also just walk through what we have established as the existing framework. So, yeah. Question.
Hello. So I'm on the tools committee, and I haven't had a chance to review what you guys have done here yet. I have a history in working with different open source foundations. I was a VP of an Apache project.
Cool.
And I'm curious if you guys have a CLA, a contribution license agreement that that basically defines what the default license and like basically you're saying when you contribute this, you are contributing it, and like government of Canada owns it, and this is the default license that's going to be applied, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so that's like, again, license is a huge theme. So we should talk about that. Good point. Yeah, as opposed to a text note. Yeah, thanks, Jason.
So if I may, that's one of those things that you have to think about, like, that you think about early is, do you want CLAs? Do you want DCOs? What's the right way to take contributions? Right?
Jeff, do you want to speak to the direction that you guys took? And
Well, I don't know that you really. So I can. I mean, so there's two basic ways of doing. Well, two or three different basic ways of doing it. A CLA is a contributor license agreement, and it's basically a legal document that the contributor signs. There's two flavors. There's an individual one, so you as a human being go and say, and then there's a corporate one where a company can say, all the people who work for me, they contribute to your project under these terms. Some companies, like tends to be in the more conservative, like financial industries, they will not allow anybody in their company to sign something that's binding on the company. So like an individual can't do it. They only accept corporate CLAs. So that's the one side. DCOs are developer certificate of origin. And that's really where you as the person contributing are basically just stating some facts like, yeah, this is my code and here it is, right? That kind of stuff. You're not giving rights. There's nothing binding going on there. And so it really comes down to how you and the government feel about your risk profile from taking something from somebody that may have a patent in it or something like that, and it gives you an idea. Like the DCO is I'll say, weaker in that regard from a legal point of view, because it's just a declaration, and anybody can say it because they're just saying, yeah, this is the stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So that's break out the lawyers and think of what you want to do there.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we just got feedback from Intellectual Property Office, and so we'll look into that. In other open source projects I've been part of, the CLA has become the sticking point, and it's led to a lack of contribution. So I am.
Yeah, it can be a lot of friction.
Yeah, and I think we also need to think about. If we do it per project or an overall organization, as you were saying, because I think that's, the challenges we came to was that it became a barrier for people to contribute.
Right. So if I can just offer, this is one of those eliminate, automate scenarios where you can look at it and say, yeah, we're just not going to do that. Or you can say, no, actually we need the protection of a CLA, but then you can automate it through tooling. There's a project called CLA Assistant.
Right.
That we use internally, and it's from SAP. We sponsor it, and we work with them as well. And that's what we use across all of our Microsoft properties to automate the CLA and remove a bunch of the friction. Not all of it, but a bunch of it.
No, good points. Yeah.
I would say that you could use either or, depending on what level of assurance you need for that software.
Yeah.
What the risk is.
And I think I would be interested to know your comfort level on this, and we'll go to the next question, but just should it be by project or overall for the organization? And we're having a real problem coming up with blanket direction on a lot of these things. Like we've talked about today that open source is a whole bunch of things, and even when we talk about open source software, it's still feeding into a bunch of different projects, and sometimes you're using bits and pieces of other code that might have some IP that's associated with it. So it's hard as a large organization, and I know you spoke to this piece as well, to kind of provide one single direction. So yeah, we'll noted, we'll think about it. Jeremy. Yeah.
Hi, Joseph Potvin. I'm Executive Director for Excel Algorithms Foundation and formerly at TBS. On that topic, you'll find that the long-standing Treasury Board Secretariat policy on intellectual property management,
Yeah.
the default in there maps really nicely to the Fedora contributor agreement.
Okay.
So if you look at the Fedora contributor agreement and look at the default standing policy, that gives you an easy way forward.
Okay.
Having said that, though, the biggest challenge that you have is that almost no one in government follows that standing TBS policy.
Yeah.
And the interesting, and mostly the reason is because it's confusing. It's confusing because it says that the default is that the, for example, the copyright remains with the supplier.
Yep.
What people think is that if the taxpayer is paying for this, then the government should get it. The problem with that is the same kind of problem you would get, say, if Red Hat wanted to acquire all of the copyright title. So if the copyright stays with the contributors, let me just leave employees aside for a second, then the contractors then retain that, and government is not on the hook for managing that copyright but had full access to use it.
Right.
Okay, and then as someone suggested, then you just list which licenses you prefer. So WET is under the MIT license, and that's fine. And you just list kind of a set of acceptable licenses.
So we just got, I've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's too bad it came the week before this, because we really haven't had time to dig into it too much and understand the full implications. And unfortunately, SIPO wasn't able to come and speak to it themselves. But we did get a analysis from SIPO that's updating that and revising it, and we are trying to understand the implications for open source code with it. So changes will be underway, and we hope that we'll be able to provide also direction in a more user-friendly way so that people are using it. One of the things that somebody was talking to me about at lunch is that even though we're doing this, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody knows about it. So to your point of it's there, but it's not necessarily being used is a problem we're coming up against.
And I'll just add one point which came up with my work with a private sector company, Fortune 500 company, is the possibility of just thinking through the possibility of letting employees who write the code retain the copyright title to what they write.
It's interesting, yeah.
It sounds like a terribly radical idea, but I can tell you there's companies all over the world that do that quite successfully.
Yeah. Thanks, Joseph. Yeah. It's a +1 for that. Yeah. Great. Other questions? Comments?
Use the mic.
Yeah, I mean.
By the way, we're online as well, so people online can follow us, follow the discussion when we're using the microphone, like I'm not right now. So they can hear us better if we use the microphone.
Do what we say, not how we act.
Hi, Steve Woodward, Cloud Perspectives, and also been advising Treasury Board and some of the others in town as well. But I actually participate heavily in a lot of the international standards. So ISO is actually right now working on a data sharing agreement standard. It's actually under SC 38, which is the cloud computing standards.
Yeah.
So then a large part of that text is actually being contributed by Microsoft because of some of their
data sharing. Sorry, like a API protocol or
so
data.
This is actually at really a policy level.
Okay.
So in terms of as a best practice, have and incorporate considerations around data sharing because, especially in the open source realm, the code itself is really just a different type of data. Then you're going to have the test data. Also needs to be clarified. So just in terms of there's a lot of different pieces and different categories and classifications under open source that you really need to consider and position in a framework around what can we share, what can't we share across what jurisdictions, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight that and consider.
Interesting. Yeah, we would love to hear more about that. Comments? Other issues?
Oh,
different issue, yeah.
True. Sorry. I'm just taking notes.
Nick's really good with issue governance. Other items you want to see in the policy? Yeah, Nick. Yeah, you can sit.
So Jeff mentioned around those 5 questions now you're down to for when do we use open source stuff? Do we have a concept of that in the policy we're working on, or does it exist now in terms of what is the government going to be asking when we try to go open sourcing code?
No, I hadn't thought of that. That's great. We can do that. Like a tree diagram of, like when you do and don't. No, one of the things that, I was talking to Roy Fielding on the way out because it's a lot of the comments that he had thought about, yes, we want to deal with, but we also are really struggling with how do you create, sorry for those of you that were paying attention to his criticism this morning, was on how the open source white paper shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Like that wasn't the goal. The goal was to have a packaged product to be able to have an executive read or somebody that was not familiar with open source and say, here are all of the pertinent points that you need to know. And so that's why it's long and it does point to things, it copies things and it points to them. So I mention this because one of the things that we've been thinking about is making like an executive version of that, which is a business plan for open source, and we're kind of struggling with what that is, but one of the things is, when do you use open source? And I think making that simple and clear, and I guess the question for me would be, what is the audience that you're looking to? Is the developer going to make that decision and that's what you want that decision tree for? Or is it for the executive level? Both combined? So yeah, great idea. I would love to know how we go about doing that in a meaningful way, as in who's the audience, what types of questions are we trying to get to? And I think for us, it's always about making sure that you're using the best tool for the best case, for the best outcome. But again, we're just setting the policies. We're only involved in a couple of open source projects. You guys are doing so much more than that. So yes, great idea, but let us know what you would want to see in that and who your audience is. And is that the same thing as what we would include in a business case? Yeah.
I think Mike Gifford has a really good example, I think he's in the room, of like examples when we didn't use open source and then didn't have the capacity as the government of Canada to be able to like reuse certain things that we paid for in the first place.
Yeah.
So I wonder also if there's like even including the option to make something open source later.
Yeah.
Like I'm as an analyst who buys stuff sometimes for things, like fighting with IP in departments, procurement officers who will say, oh no, IP always has to be, and
Yeah.
yes, it's like the guidance that this is the preferred mode, and then this is like almost even who you can, and maybe it's not in this paper, but more in your business case, like this is who you can contact to get support if you
Yeah.
want to employ open source, and your procurement or your IP folks are giving you problems because they don't think TDS likes that.
Yeah.
How TDS say no, you do like that. And like, here's how to do it.
I feel like we just need to like multiply and be like, yes, it's good. Yes, it's good. Like, that's like really what everybody needs. Yeah, a recorder. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Recourse to like know there really is like permission to do this.
Yeah.
Having like a clear point person who can confirm that, like that would really help people who are buying things to be able to do it.
Okay, so a couple of things, and I'm going to rehash them because for the people on the web that did not hear, just thinking of examples where there were times that we could have used open source and we didn't, and then also how do we leverage existing open source activities that are already happening within the government, and then how do you have central authority to go to your particular subject matter domain experts, whether it be legal or procurement, to say, thou shalt do this. So, a few things. One is that's the whole point of having a policy. So that's step number one. And so if there are things that aren't in here, then please do let us know. I think Joseph made a really good point. There's a lot of things that already exist in policy that allow us to do this. And in some cases, they've been there for a long time, and we just don't know that they're there. In other cases, they don't actually align with one another, so we're giving different guidance. So second point is that we are trying to create a broader digital policy. You guys have probably heard of this. It'll follow on the heels of the digital standards, which were just finally released last week. But please do reference those digital standards because that came from the minister, not even just bureaucratic policy. And so those are really guiding principles, behaviors on how we want to act and how we're going to progress as digital. And so open is clearly stated in there. So I would use that as your first line of challenge. But I know you need more than that. So third point is that the policy is also going to be too high level for you. So include things, but what we're trying to do with the policy, because those things don't stay, they don't get looked at that often. On average, it's about once every 5 years. We are with the digital policy trying to do greater alignment to make sure that on one hand, we're saying you can't do this, and on the other hand, we are saying you can do this. So we're trying to make sure that we're looking at those things. But if you do find those in examples of open source, please do let us know, and we'll do our best to rectify that now that these policies are open. But with that, we are really working to create enablement tools, is what I like to think of them, is because sometimes it's about having just stuff written down, and then other times it's saying this is actually how you navigate or the things that you tell. So we are meeting with PSPC next week, actually, on open source procurement specifically, because we don't think that the direction that's been provided has been consistent. And I had the fortune to host a table. PSPC and OECD were working on modernization of a procurement playbook, but it's global. And it was here at Bayview. I was going to say a few months ago, but it was probably like 6 months ago. I have no idea. Concept of time is minimal right now. But anyway, point being is that I think there's lots of great work that's been done, and one of the principles was open. So I was at the open table, and I was hearing the same things over and over that, I was moderating it, so I had 3 sections, and I heard the same things over and over, is that the procurement process, it's not just about it being closed in terms of its rules, it's the inconsistent interpretation from procurement professionals. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, and we're doing this on a couple of fronts, but really work with the School of Public Service and PSPC to make sure that we have those tools in place, everything from policy to actual education materials. They're on the same page, but to make sure that we're looking at it in a more holistic and enabling way, because right now we've been very hands-off on this. So we totally understand. We just need time to kind of work through that.
Will you also have a directive after the policy?
So this will probably be a directive. Right now it's being drafted as a standard, but we'll hear from PMP, Priorities and Planning, what it will be.
Because that would be the more detailed version, right?
That's not really how they work. So no, there'll be tools that'll be guidelines are what have detail, and so those guidelines will have. I just don't think that guidelines are always the best route either. I think that having education packages, for example, with the school are better things. And yeah, I point to Anna because we're just thinking about this right now. And because we want to be able to come from an authoritative place to say you're able to do this, but also be able to point to things that are more detailed. So I don't mean to say, oh, it's not going to be a directive. You're going to have your authoritative stuff, and then you're going to have low-level detailed stuff that can also be more iterative than a policy that's open once every 5 years. Okay. I probably could have just said that in the beginning.
Very briefly, so there was some work done between Acquisitions Branch, Public Works, and TVS around 2010 on precisely this topic. And in a nutshell, it was concluded that obtaining, and that's the word that was chosen, obtaining free open source software from somewhere else is not an acquisition, it's not a procurement.
Yeah, we heard.
It becomes such if you buy something, but having your computers read something is equivalent to having a public servant read an article. So there's a lot of confusion about that, though, because procurement seems to be the way it's approached.
Yeah, we have a meeting next week.
Good, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, on that topic, to say that's a cute interpretation. Digital standards say otherwise. Hi.
Hi. I've been talking to a few people today, and some of the roadblocks that came up that I wanted to put as an issue here is around classification levels.
Yep.
I know TVS has come out and said that source code should be considered unclassified. It would be some people. It would be very helpful if that was made much more explicit and clear.
Yeah,
that it is unclassified, and if you have secrets in your source code, you are bad, and you should feel bad.
We'll put exactly that.
Say exactly that.
Yeah.
Quote me on that.
Yeah.
And the other was around security. Is that under almost no circumstances should security be considered an obstacle towards releasing source code?
Or it should go through the exact same security check as all other code.
And the answer should be source code is not open source is not a reason for security.
Yes.
Like just but it's not even getting what I'm hearing from other people is not even getting to those levels. If someone proposes it and someone says no, you can't do that because they think open source is insecure.
Yeah. So one thing I would say though is that like these are great things, and we've heard about this a lot, and it's amazing to see everyone here. Please don't disappear after today. Like, we need all of you guys to actually work on this stuff. Well, no, I'm being real serious about this because we have these things, and it's super fun, and everybody's really energized. But in order to make it happen, like, it can't be me and Guillaume just doing it in our office, which right now, in many cases, like obviously Sebastien, others are incredible in doing their little piece of it, but to push this from a central perspective, not only do we need your input to make this happen, we need to hear what those challenges are right now so we can build the appropriate tools. And more importantly, when we put a call out to say, hey, we need you on a working group to build these things or to share your knowledge, right now, sharing knowledge and having a coffee with someone, I don't think is not allowed. So we could do that and start there. And then once other barriers start to get knocked down, then we can push more and more. But please don't go away after today. Like, join the fold and help move this forward. Because if we can get 300 people to work on this stuff, like, we can move mountains quick. And my time is up.
Hi, I'm Karen Cranston. I'm from agriculture. So first of all, I just want to say that having a policy come top down would be phenomenal for us. I'm in a group that writes a lot of open source software, or we write software that we want to make open source, and the barrier for us is largely there is no departmental policy for putting when we can put something on GitHub.
Right.
So that becomes a barrier, and then we're in discussions about, well, who's going to write that policy and who's going to pay someone to write that policy and which budget is that going to come out of. And so if this existed, yay.
All the bureaucratic questions.
And the, the other piece too is just ensuring that, whatever, if the policy is high level and then whatever detail comes out in various other pieces, recognizing that open source software is extremely varied, right? Yeah. And the policy that's going to apply to a web application that faces publicly, that holds government data, which we write some of those, is entirely different from a bunch of Python scripts that someone's writing to do bioinformatics analysis. Mm-hmm. And that you either need to have different policies or the policy needs to recognize that these are, ends of a spectrum and not to, block that sort of, we do a lot of research focused.
Yeah. That's why I'm
work.
saying that this needs to, like, the policy is a one size fits all, mm-hmm. and then all of the components that flow from that are those details.
And so, we're happy to work with you.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So, okay, our clock says we have 3 minutes, but I know there's people outside. I think, we'll get moving on with the agenda today. You guys understand what it is that we're looking for. Please do enter any issues that you have or pull requests specifically to the changes. If you don't like GitHub and you want to send Guillaume an email, you could do that too. Old school. Like, send him a note. Like, so exactly. Yeah, like, he comes down. It's like, I have all this paper to deal with. Anyway, so it's actually, correctly. The unconference, I was like, oh, so you guys are doing it virtually? And they're like, no, we have index cards. And I was like, oh. I don't understand. Do not compute. So that's, if you guys can do that, though, we would be super, super grateful. And we will do our best to get this turned around. Again, I can't stress more on the whole IP stuff. We have a response to that, and we'll be sending out more information soon. Yeah, thanks so much.